Thanks for joining us on Not Boring CEs, where we don't think you should be bored to death while getting your continuing ed. Keep listening here, then hop over to notboringces.com to get all your online CE credits. All right, y'all, let's get to learning. Jenet Dove is a licensed psychotherapist and the owner of Jenet Dove Counseling Services. With over 7 years of experience, her counseling practice focuses on helping individuals who are struggling with perfectionism and burnout, and who are ready to explore the possibilities of finding peace in their lives. Jenet began her own journey towards inner peace more than a decade ago and hasn't looked back since. Through therapy, she was able to reframe her own story of perfectionism, overcome unhealthy self-perceptions, and rebuild her self-worth. She brings this philosophy into every interaction, connection, and decision she makes, valuing her own self-worth and skills, maintaining healthy boundaries, and supporting others in their healing journey. Jenet believes that her approach has brought her a sense of peace and sustainability in both her professional and personal life. She's eager to share her insights and support others on their path towards healing. Jenet, welcome. Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I am your host, Allison Pereira. I'm here with Jenet Dove, and we are talking about perfectionism from a clinical lens. We're going to be diving into conceptualizing perfectionism, maybe in some ways you haven't before. And I'm psyched because this is going to really help a lot of our clients. So thanks for being here, Jenet.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So can we first talk about what perfectionism is and how it shows up for people?
Absolutely. So perfectionism is a belief system. It's the belief that if I do everything perfectly, then somehow I can avoid these negative feelings of shame, embarrassment, rejection. It's the belief that if I keep achieving and excelling and accomplishing, I will be worthy of love and acceptance. So it's solely dependent in a lot of ways on perception.
Mm-hmm.
What we believe others think of us. And it's deeply rooted in shame and the fear of rejection and failure.
Yeah. And since it's rooted in perception, there's also a lot of opportunity for projection
Yes,
also.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I often say that um, one of the um, one of the most harmful things about perfectionism is not only do we end up demanding it from ourselves, we end up demanding it from others and
Mm-hmm.
our relationships. And that can just create this cycle where no one, not even ourselves, is ever good enough. And we often end up feeling very lonely through that.
Yeah. And I think about how that plays out generationally too.
Mhm.
Perfectionistic mothers putting
Yes,
perfection, like expectations on their children, and it just
yes,
playing out over generations.
yes.
Yeah. So we've got this way of viewing perfectionism as this belief system that is rooted in shame and really wanting to be loved.
Hmm.
All of us
Yeah,
have shame. All of us really want to be loved.
yes.
What do you see as the mechanism for some of us being more perfectionistic than others? Is that
Mm.
attachment stuff? Is it where
Yeah.
does that come from?
Yeah, I think a lot of it really is rooted in developmental trauma. I think
Mhm.
we have to look at it through a lens of attachment theory. I think exploring attachment wounds, early messaging from our parents, and our relationship with our primary caregiver is critical.
Mhm.
Again, somewhere early on, we were taught that we have to look a certain way, or behave a certain way, or do certain things in order to be loved and accepted. And those messages become internalized as I'm not good enough as I am, so I must keep performing and perfecting and pleasing.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's really unrealistic. It's an unrealistic trap cycle, I like to say. But going back to attachment theory, we're familiar with those different attachment styles. And so when we explore typically avoidant or insecure attachment styles, that is where we can really trace some of that messaging back to um, I was never good enough just as I am. You
Mm.
know, there was always something, whether it be I'm only getting your attention through accolades. I'm only getting your attention when I'm on the sports field performing, and when all that stops, like it's not there. There's a
Mhm.
void. And so again, that becomes who I am on my own, just as I exist. it's not enough. It's not
Yeah.
enough for love. It's not worthy enough. And so then I develop all these mechanisms, later in life, or that come out later in life, such as, just constantly going and going, which evidently leads to burnout and depression, high functioning, over functioning, anxiety, etc.
Hmm. It's interesting listening to this as a clinician and as a person and as a mother.
Hmm.
Like I'm thinking about all of these things at play of like, as a mother,
Yeah.
like the squeaky wheel gets a grease, right? If one of my kids is getting a lot of accolades or something, of course we're gonna be like,
Right.
fantastic, good job. And I've tried my best, I believe, to make sure that they feel really loved no matter what all the time.
Right. Right.
But just the honestly, like constant intentionality
Yes.
around that as a
Yes.
parent it's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot
Mhm,
because, and I think it's very easy to applaud when there's performance.
yeah.
That's very easy to do. It's, what are you doing when your kid is not performing?
Mhm,
What are you doing? What are the spaces in between look like?
right.
What's not being said in those spaces?
Mhm.
Yeah.
When you think about your clients who are struggling with perfectionism, is there something that might have made a difference in their upbringing for like well-intentioned parents who are really trying?
Hmm.
Is there anything you can think of, like one-on-one time every week, or like those kinds of things that would be helpful to have prevented them needing to come into therapy for perfectionism?
Um, I actually don't. I don't quite know. I don't want. I don't. I'm not quite sure about that. But what I will say is, um, one thing to avoid is using shame as a tool to get the outcome you want from your kids.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that, I know I was parented heavily through shame.
Mhm,
I was, I think in a lot of ways that kept me very small.
mhm,
And in that smallness, I learned to behave and do and, respond in certain ways that met, that elicited the response that I wanted or
mhm,
desired from mom. And
mhm,
so I think being cognizant of not using that shame as a tool to control behavior from your children.
mhm. Yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
How, I mean, it lives in shame. So of course that shame is perpetuated,
Yeah.
like that's the thing that still remains as an adult to continue
Yeah.
to work through.
And it's very hard because, again, one thing that Brene Brown says is that shame thrives in silence,
Hmm.
and it grows. It's like just it exponentially grows in silence. And it's one of those things that we fear greatly about putting words to, putting language around.
Hmm.
Um, but the thing about it is that's what gets us out of our shame cycle. It's
Hmm.
putting language around it. It is speaking it. You know, it is showing up as yourself in safe spaces and letting people love you just as
Hmm.
you are. And so that is one of the biggest ways when we talk about moving my clients out or our clients out of, that perfectionism cycle, is really building community, building safe spaces in which you are able to just exist, where you're not performing, where you're not pleasing, um, and allowing those people to just love you.
Hmm. I'm thinking about this as a clinician and how this plays out for my clients is like when they
Mhm.
find that community, it's
Yeah.
hard to trust that they do really love them just for them. Like there's still a good amount of performance initially,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, to try to like continue to earn the love that's already freely given.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times people think community has to be very big,
Hmm.
when in reality, um, shame thrives in silence, but it doesn't mean that it dies within the massive public. It
Right.
can, you can work on it one on one in therapy. That's a very safe space to start, showing up just as you are. But even just having one or two people in your life who can just love you as you are, can make a phenomenal impact in breaking
Absolutely.
that shame the cycle of perfectionism.
Hmm. So I'm thinking about clinically when we're working with clients who might not have that, they might not have one or two people who
Hmm.
truly love them.
Right.
How do you help your clients either reach out to build those relationships or recognize in some circumstances they already have those relationships, they just don't realize because they're still trying to be shiny and new all the time for them.
Absolutely. And, in a lot of ways, that's how perfectionists make connections. They're usually not themselves. And,
Hmm.
when they first meet people, they're putting on this version of themselves that they believe, um, is what others want to see or want from them. Um, I, I think a lot of it comes from being willing to try new behavior,
Hmm.
because you won't know until you start taking those risks. um, and also knowing what you're taking the risk for. Like, if for example, if I met a connection and this connection only knows this perfect flawless version of myself that I've let on, and one of my goals in therapy is to really kind of unbreak this or start peeling back some of these layers of shame. One of the biggest things that perfectionists struggle with is like making mistakes or saying the wrong thing. And so
Hmm.
if I'm with this person and I end up saying something that I believe is not appropriate or could have been taken the wrong way or whatnot, I'm in my head. Like,
Hmm.
I can't focus on anything else other than what I said 20 minutes ago, and ruminating on that. And that's something that I would take to therapy, and through therapy, if that was my client, I would ask them, like, well, how did the other person respond? What evidence do you have that they're thinking of you any differently? What evidence do you have that the relationship is ruined now? It seems like they don't really care. It seems like this might be a safe space for you to start exploring other ways in which you can take risk within the relationship. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think about the like that pain of shame.
Hmm.
It's it freezes you in your tracks.
It is. It is. I think I really like how Brene Brown says, she calls it a shame spiral.
Hmm.
And so she talks a lot about the physiological responses that happen within your body. And so part of the work that I like to do with my clients is recognizing what a shame spiral feels like in our bodies.
Mm.
Because once we're in that spiral, really all bets are off. The only work that you're responsible for at that moment is getting you out of that spiral, is
Yes.
getting you into a safe space, getting you back into your body, getting your nervous system regulated again.
Hmm.
Nothing else is going to make sense until that happens.
I love that. Can you talk us through how you help them identify how it feels in their body? Like, how does it play out in session?
Yeah, and so it's usually, taking it. If I keep going with the same example, I'm presenting this perfect version of myself to someone who maybe I want to build a friendship with. I say something wrong, or I think I said something wrong, and again, I'm stuck in my head. I can't think about anything else. But additionally to being stuck in my head, I need to pay attention to what's happening here. Usually, there's increased heart rate, there's sweaty palms. It's almost identical to like a trauma response.
Hmm.
um, and for me, it, like you said, it stops you in your tracks. You're either going to go to fight or flight or freeze, one of the two, depending on what your nervous system how your nervous system typically responds to a threat. And so being able to identify that threat response, and knowing that, because a lot of times we want to run into fight or flight, we want to problem solve, we want to fix it, but sorry,
It's okay.
nothing that you're going to do in that. Sorry, the doggies want to participate.
They can join. I can't even hear them. So,
You can't hear them?
mm-mm.
No. Oh wow, you have a good sound system then. Nothing that you do in those moments when your nervous system is that dysregulated is going
Hmm.
to be productive. It's going to be conducive to any type of healthy connection.
Hmm.
And so yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about how we muscle through those moments, most of us, right? Most of our clients just muscle through those moments. Their brain is going a million miles an hour. The person they're talking to might notice that they're not totally engaged, but they're still
Yes.
engaging with our clients
Yeah.
nonetheless, which
Yeah.
then can bring up more shame because like I just missed the last 5 minutes of what was said because I was in my head.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not only like I missed the last minutes of what I said, but it's just like I'm being so harsh and critical to myself. Like I'm really tearing myself apart. It's you're not nice to yourself in the shame spot. You
Mhm.
really do turn on yourself. You become very vicious. Like,
Mhm.
what's wrong with me? Why did I do that? Why did I say that? This is why no one wants to connect with me. This is why I suck XYZ, you know.
Do you find that those internal voices are um like internalized voices from parents or like
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. Most of us know, inner self critic is a parental voice.
Mhm.
And so I'm sorry. Do you mind if I put my dogs away?
Go
It is
for it.
very loud over here.
Yeah, yeah.
Boys, come on, Grace, 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 Grace. Come on, back away, back away, back away. Sorry, I did not plan appropriately. The guy that comes to clean up their poop every day, every Tuesday, is
Uh-huh.
here, and
Got
they
it.
look to bark at him. Anyways, um, what were we saying?
The internalized voice, yeah, is the
Yes.
parental voice.
Yes, and that is a big part of the work too. I often, when I hear that, I often ask my clients, "Oh, let's stop, pause. Whose voice is that? Because it doesn't sound like you." Um,
Mhm.
and so part of the work as well is learning to separate that voice from yourself, naming
Mhm.
that voice, so it doesn't further become internalized.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there perfectionists that you've worked with where it's not the parental voice? Like a sibling's voice or a peer's voice or
I think I think that that's a great question. I think it could be. I've heard siblings, in terms like when I ask whose voice is that, oh, that's a sibling, a grandmother. I
Mhm.
think it it can equate to anyone who's had authority in that person's life.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting you say authority because I think about I have one client who had kind of like late onset perfectionism. They
Mhm.
weren't a perfectionist as in their childhood or adolescence, but they were in an abusive romantic relationship. And so the internalized voice was an ex-partner.
Yeah.
And how like that sense of authority in an abusive relationship is definitely like present. So
Absolutely.
yeah. When you think about like that sense of shame, you're helping clients identify that shame in their body. You're
Mhm.
helping them identify who owns this thought that's in your head. Where did this come from? So
Yes.
you've got some like physical and mental slash emotional digging around to see where these things are existing.
Yes.
Do you have clients who may cling some to the perfectionism because it has worked for them in certain areas of their lives?
So I think that's where I. So there's this thing where people are like healthy perfectionism.
Mhm.
I have a problem with that phrase.
Mhm.
Let's, because I don't think what we're referring to is perfectionism. I think what we're referring to is striving, healthy
Mhm.
striving. And I think terminology is very important.
Mhm.
And there's a difference between that.
Mhm.
Um, and so it is like, let's pick out the traits that have gotten you to where you are today. You are a hard worker. You do know how to excel. You do know how to put your mind to certain tasks and to get things done. That's not what we address when we're addressing perfectionism. What we're addressing is more so the what happens when you don't meet the goals? What happens when you don't, it's not performed in the way that you had envisioned. It didn't go exactly how you thought it was going to go. That is what I I really focus on.
Mhm. Are most of your clients coming into your practice for help with perfectionism or for help with other things and you uncover the perfectionism?
Yeah, I don't think that they usually come to me for burnout.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they usually come to me for burnout, and then we trace that back to, well, you know, the cycle of
Mhm.
burnout, which often is tied heavily to this perfectionism, the strive to just keep going and going and going and going, um, and then not pausing, no
Mhm.
breaks, because again, with perfectionism, our worth is tied to our productivity.
Mhm. Yeah. And if our work is tied to our productivity, it's not as if um our worth rather is tied to our productivity. It's not as if we're going to stop working if that's the only place that we feel valued.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so, a lot of that is, what else do you have going on in your life? Another big question I like to ask my clients is whose dream are you chasing? Is this
Hmm.
even what you want to be doing?
Yes.
As again, when we talk about some of the internalized messaging from our childhood, we've learned what we were supposed to be growing up. We learned, the right answer to that question. Well, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hmm.
And so some of us just took that and ran with it, and
Hmm.
we never really took the time to assess, is this really what I want to be doing? And
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, for some of my clients, it's not. You're chasing mom's dream, you're chasing dad's dream, and how is that working out for you?
Yeah. But thinking about how even if it was their dream, it doesn't mean it's still their dream. Like ages and
Right,
stages,
right,
like
right.
even if it did like originate from them, maybe even as a rebellion against parents,
Right,
um, it can still be no longer the goal.
exactly. And allowing yourself permission to change.
Yeah. And I mean,
Very important.
perfectionists stay so busy that they
Mhm.
don't often have time to check in with themselves.
No,
And nor do they necessarily want to because they don't want to have to change course because
no,
that's
no, because a
confrontive.
lot of times, again, when you build this perception of yourself,
Hmm.
and now you've hit a wall, and now you're in therapy, and your therapist is peeling back these layers, and you're faced with this idea of, um, something that doesn't seem as glamorous as what you built.
Hmm.
That's scary as hell.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody wants to go backwards.
Yeah.
And if it's perceived as backwards,
It's perceived that it's backwards, yes,
hmm
100%.
yeah, when really like having more time to yourself and peace
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
never going backwards.
100%. I think perfectionists struggle greatly with sitting still,
Hmm. Yeah.
just sitting still and doing and not doing anything, because again, our worth is tied to our productivity.
Hmm. How do you ease clients into learning how to sit still?
I think it's nervous system regulation,
Hmm.
100%. So I do talk a lot about the polyvagal theory with my clients.
Hmm.
I do, talk a lot about, well, what happens in your body when you're not doing anything? Where do you go? Do you go to fight? Do you go to flight? Do you go to freeze? Do you go to fawn? What and why? What are you telling yourself? What are the messages that are coming up as you're in fight or flight? And usually it's, what are you gonna do? You're just gonna sit there and rest all day? You're just gonna take a nap?
I wish that people listening could see your face because the wonderful judgment there of like disgusting, a nap is what your face is communicating. Yeah, because
Yeah,
that's the internal monologue, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's, and a lot of that again is, we were taught that we always have to be performing a certain way, looking a certain way, even when no one is looking.
Hmm.
And so that really sticks with us.
Hmm.
And the idea of like creating this soft life, or this life that we want for ourselves. Um, I think a lot of the work too is, identity, breaking away from that, or I wouldn't necessarily say breaking away from the inner child, but learning how to reparent yourself, and also allowing your inner child to show up in a way that she couldn't or he couldn't then,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and knowing and allowing them to, to know that the way you are, it's okay. It's okay for you. You are responding very appropriately developmentally,
Mm-hmm.
for where you are right now. And that's okay. You don't
Yeah.
always have to be buttoned up. You're allowed to take a break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I, work with folks with eating disorders who struggle
Mm-hmm.
mightily with perfectionism most of the time. And how that sneaks into food and body stuff,
Mm-hmm.
how it
Mm-hmm.
sneaks into all these different, it sneaks into work stuff. It sneaks into so
Yeah.
many, like immovable parts of our lives that we have to like
Mm-hmm.
make peace with almost one at a time. Like I wish I could just be like perfectionism, poof, and like
Yeah.
all of it goes away. But I find like when my clients get a handle on a gentleness with themselves around
Mm-hmm.
food and body, so all of a sudden they're working a lot more than they did before. And it likes to kind of switch to these other areas almost and hide if we don't get down to the root of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I know like you do a lot of attachment wound work with people and
Yeah.
helping using attachment theory to really guide them towards long-term recovery from
Yeah.
perfectionism. Can you walk us through some of how you do that, what you see working with clients?
Yeah. So again, attachment theory categorizes people into different attachment styles based off of their relationships with their early caregivers. And perfectionism often arises as a coping mechanism in early attachment, or to manage some of the inconsistencies and rejections or rejection or neglect that is experienced during early attachment. Um, and so the difficulty about it is because I feel like you have to handle attachment stuff, especially people who have never questioned their relationship with their early caregivers or looked at it through a critical lens. You have to handle that very delicately because
Mhm,
this isn't a, let's shit on mom and let's shit on dad for what they did.
mhm,
It's more of a mom and dad did what they could with the tools they had, and some harm was done,
mhm.
and there was a better way to go about it, and this is a result of what happened.
Right.
So it's really allowing um, my clients a safe space to explore some of those early attachment some of those attachment relationships with their caregivers,
Mhm,
um, critically, and know that it's okay. And I often have to tell them it's just us in here. Mom's not listening. No one's eavesdropping.
mhm,
Because there is this fear of um, it's wrong. I shouldn't be talking about my mom like this. I shouldn't be talking about dad like this. They've done so much. I am who I am today because of, everything that they've done. Um, yes, and you're here with me today. You're paying me thousands of dollars
uh-huh.
to
Yeah.
see me. So,
Yeah.
we have to be able to hold both of that,
Uh-huh.
at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. But it's our job is not, we're not trying to make you hate your parents. We're not trying to
No,
make you badmouth them.
no,
We're just taking an honest look at what went
yes,
down.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah, it's allowing them a very, very safe, delicate space to explore some of those early messages. What did you need? This is what they did, but what do you think you needed in that moment?
Mhm,
And sometimes I take it a step further. Well, what do you think stopped them from being able to give that to you? And then that's where we really develop compassion for mom and dad and
mhm,
their limited resources and their trauma experiences,
mhm.
um, and how they were parented and how that, it's all connected.
Yeah,
But again, there's compassion and there's accountability, and we can hold both of those at the same time.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Does your work with clients around attachment end up impacting their current relationship with their parents if they're still living?
Um, I I often start by assuring them that it doesn't have to,
Mhm.
because I think that's part of the fear too
Right.
is, okay, now my therapist is telling me I can't be in a relationship. I gotta, break it off. I gotta, stop talking to my mom. No, I really want people to know, like, going into this work, that's not the end result. That's not the goal.
Mhm.
The
Right.
goal is the goal is more so addressing how you perceive yourself and what your behavior is as a result of those early attachments
Mhm.
and some of that messaging. It's now I will say if um if we are not able to move forward, if we're not able to have a change in behavior or see desired results because the connection with that attachment figure today is still so strong, they still have a heavy hand,
Mhm.
and how you're performing and showing up and perfecting and pleasing, we have to talk about boundaries. 100%, we do
Mhm.
have to talk about that. That's I'm not going to sugarcoat that,
Yeah.
and then that goes into a different conversation of, well, what are boundaries, and what boundaries versus control, and making sure that we understand the difference between, it's not about telling your parents what to do, it's about you know saying what you need, stating, we're not asking, we're stating what we need to keep
Mhm.
ourselves safe and protected.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which again goes back to nervous system work, right? Because having
Hmm.
those conversations with your parents, maybe for the first time in your life,
Very
is really,
difficult.
yeah, it's
Very,
scary. It's disrupting a system that's been at play your whole life.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think, and a lot of it is a lot of the work is realizing that if we have to get to that point to really break our cycle or disrupt our work with perfectionism, um, it's making sure that when you're having those boundary conversations, you're having it from your adult self and not
Hmm.
from your inner child.
Yeah.
um, because a lot of times even just the presence of our parents can shrink us down to that
Hmm.
little girl, that little boy, right? um, and so it's really, there's a lot of work to be done before we even think about, depending on the severity of the case, think about having those conversations with mom or dad regarding boundaries.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about nervous system work again. Like you were saying, like you invite your clients to notice,
Hmm.
is it fight, flight, freeze, fawn? Like what happens for them
Hmm.
when they get activated?
Yeah.
When they're sitting still, for instance, and that's
Hmm.
activating.
Yeah.
Or maybe when they're having these conversations with parents. Do you have different ways of responding to whether they go into fight or flight or freeze or
Yeah.
fawn?
Yeah. My biggest thing is that you just have to stop everything.
Mhm.
You have to stop everything. Your only goal when that happens is to get yourself back into a balanced nervous system,
Mhm.
right? That is your only goal. So it's very critical to be able to recognize our shame triggers.
Mhm.
It's very critical to be able to recognize when we are becoming escalated and then eventually dysregulated,
Mhm.
so we can stop.
Mhm.
And then it's, okay, self-soothing, taking myself for a walk, removing myself from whatever the environment is right now. There's, all those different coping strategies to help us regulate again before we re-engage,
Mhm.
or not even re-engage, like before we, reflect and assess what happened,
Mhm.
and then determine what our next steps are.
Ah, it's interesting because I'm thinking about myself and how my response, my nervous system, like knee-jerk trigger is different based on the circumstance, right? If I'm sitting still, not a great person at sitting still yet, still working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get flight, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I all of a sudden think of 300 things I need to do. And sitting in this chair, like my knees start bouncing.
Mm-hmm.
I just like go into this flight action. If I am given feedback that I'm interpreting as an insult to like I didn't try hard enough, I can take all sorts of feedback all day
Mm-hmm.
long. But if there's this thread of clearly you didn't really try,
Yeah.
my inner perfectionist comes out and I get in really defensive and fight mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and just thinking through each of those and how for both of them, I do just need to sit my ass down. Just breathe or take a walk, like
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah, it's interesting.
Because you think about it, when you respond in any of those states, you're not being authentic to yourself,
Mhm,
first and foremost. And second of all, you're more than likely going to exacerbate the situation.
mhm.
You're going to make it worse.
Yeah.
Because particularly when we're talking about shame and perfectionism, when we go into that, it's usually like there's this fear of disconnect that is happening when I enter one of those states, when I enter dysregulation, and your goal is to erratically feel connected and feel that love and acceptance and worth again. And so
Mhm,
you're doing all of these things that are like authentic to you
mhm,
to get that, as opposed to just, okay, let me regulate myself first. Let me take care of myself. My body
mhm,
is telling me my needs are not being met. And that is no one's job right now but myself to own and take care of.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting because perfectionists already take everything on, right? They're the ones in the group project who does it all. Like
Right.
it's and yet this taking on the responsibility of doing things differently feels very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. It does. And especially if it's not again, it doesn't fall in line with the way you had envisioned it for yourself, this
Right.
perception that you created of yourself.
Right. And you're not moving towards that love and acceptance that the perfection is there to grab anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think like, and I touched on it some with my like, this is when I get defensive. But just shame and rejection in people with perfectionism. Can we talk some? You just did a whole shiver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we
Well,
talk
because
some?
yeah, absolutely. Because the perfectionism again, it's so deeply rooted in shame and just so deeply rooted in wanting to be loved and accepted. Um, that's really all it is. And so I really do. I feel very greatly for myself and anyone else who struggles deeply with perfectionism, because we, at the end of the day, sometimes we go into it thinking that we want to be loved and accepted for this perception that we're putting on, but no, we want to be loved and accepted when all the walls are taken down.
Mhm.
That is really the goal.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah. And the like, there's perceived rejection
Mm-hmm.
and then there's real rejection. Both of
Mm-hmm.
them feel awful. But at least in my clients, when it's actual rejection, like the depths of shame that they go into,
Mm-hmm.
it's deeper than the perceived rejection. As
What
if
do you
like,
mean by perceived rejection?
so like your example earlier of, I've just ruined this friendship that I wanted to get going.
Right.
Because I said this stupid thing, like
Right.
I'm going to think about it for years. It was so dumb.
Right.
Versus getting broken up with or
Yeah.
losing your job or something like
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
That at least with the clients I've worked with, the difference between the perceived rejection, the emotional response to the perceived rejection, and the emotional response to the actual rejection, there's a through line, but the actual rejection is much deeper and longer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So to that end, like it makes you think like so on some level they know that this is a perceived rejection and not like true hardcore rejection,
Right.
which gives some
Right.
leeway to maybe work with it some.
I think I think to an extent 100%. I think that we can convince ourselves that it's real.
Mhm.
I think we
Yeah.
can convince ourselves that our reality is that I messed this up. I
Mhm.
ruined this chance of being connected with this person. And that again, the fear of disconnect is so strong
Mhm.
that I will be stuck in that shame spiral for hours and
Mhm.
days. Um,
I
yeah.
think about like the memes that are popular around like not knowing if somebody's mad at you. Like I see
Mm,
these all the time around like anxiety and that everybody's mad at you and how common that is in our perfectionistic clients.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you've done something imperfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I like to encourage my clients to collect evidence.
Hmm.
What is your evidence that they are mad at you, that you've done something to upset them? And then, if you when we get to a space where we feel safe enough, let's just ask.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's just check with that person and see
Mhm.
what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
And if that and that's more, evidence to put in your goodie bag of like this person is a safe space. If I'm able to go to them and put what feels like put my life on the line and ask them, "Why are you mad at me?" And they respond compassionately and they're able to create space and really unpack it with me. And the amount of regulation that happens within your nervous system when during that moment, that's very powerful for
Hmm.
building your tribe and building true
Yeah.
connections with others.
Absolutely. And something I know I value a lot in friends that I also provide to my friends is like, I will tell you.
Yeah,
I swear to God, I will tell you if I
absolutely.
am mad about anything, frustrated with anything. If there's anything in the way of our relationship, you can trust me to bring it up and not stew on it and think
Absolutely.
about you behind, like think about you without bringing it up.
Absolutely.
And that feels like having friends like that has completely changed my relationship with, are you mad at me? Because I trust that they'll tell me.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and that feels good that I have friends that love me enough to say the hard thing.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Um, I agree with that.
And sometimes it's hard to find those friends when you're still stuck in perfectionism because you're not showing up like that.
You're not showing up as yourself. No.
Hmm.
And it's really not until you begin doing that you're going to find the people who are meant to be in your life, like
Hmm.
stick to you like glue.
Yeah.
Um, I think oftentimes we can end up in friendships that replicate a relationship with the caregiver,
Hmm.
who demands that perfectionism from us because that's how we're presenting ourselves to the other person.
Hmm.
And if someone's attracted to that perception that you're presenting, then of course they're going to keep wanting that. They're going to want you to, keep performing that way.
Hmm.
Um, and so that can be very tough, a tough cycle to break out of when we think about building a tribe to try new behavior and really create safety within our relationships.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm thinking about like as somebody who I pretty much don't struggle with perfectionism at this point in my life. It'll sneak up on me sometimes, but I
Hmm.
bash it back to
Hmm.
place. Um, I think about when I did struggle with it more and how um like those friendships were anchor points.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like my parents were anchor points because they weren't critical parents
Hmm.
in the way that we think of like most perfectionists
Hmm.
parents are really critical. Like I was an only child. I got a lot of attention.
Okay.
um, but I think for me, a lot of my perfectionism came in my own, like comparing myself to peers and feeling like I was
Mm,
falling short in so many ways,
mm,
which I don't know where that voice came from.
right.
But it was something I noticed and really beat myself up with a lot. And then realized like, oh, I'm good at a few things. So I'll just go really hard on those. Like I'll
Okay.
just
Yeah.
be like,
The greatest at those. And
yeah, which is exhausting.
very much.
Um, and just thinking about how that dynamic of finding if like sometimes if the pain came or was exacerbated by relationships with peers, how finding different friends can
Hmm.
be so healing. Um,
Yeah. There's a lot of healing in community. And I feel like sometimes the word community is so big, but I don't know how to make it smaller, because I sometimes think when we think about community, it's like the village that, we need, but really community can just be one or two people.
mhm,
But the idea is that um, allowing talking through your shame with someone who is safe and someone who gets it. There's so much power in that.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much, and it's really the only way you're going to get when you're going to start breaking that shame cycle. That's the only
Mm-hmm.
way to minimize it.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, it thrives in silence.
Mm-hmm. And how, like, a lot of people are so afraid if they bring up their
Hmm.
shame that they're going to be either the person is going to only see that about them,
Right.
like this one thing that's so hard to talk about, or that the other person doesn't experience the same level of shame around something. But like we've all got shame.
Yeah, we all have it. We all have it. We all might not have the language to describe what it is, but we all
Right.
have it. It's a universal experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And how there's just like this, like, human shared experience,
Hmm.
and that it also doesn't have to become our identity. Because I think sometimes there's some risks with some people where they start talking about their shame, um, and they maybe over identify with it. And it becomes almost like a pathological uh, intensity around their shame. They've got to keep talking about it in a way that stirs the pot more than processes it. Because I think it's the way in which they talk about it. I see this a lot with eating disorders around like body shame, for instance.
Okay.
And it's like when they say out loud, um, I feel disgusting. I feel like my belly is disgusting, like
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And then once it's out, sometimes they're not processing through it as they talk about it. If they're not with a therapist,
Yeah.
they're just like complaining about their body to their friends, is how their
Yeah.
friends interpret it.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Huh. And is it like if a friend does try to like are they receptive of the compassion that their friends can hold for them?
Um,
Are you finding
I,
that in this particular instance, it's
mhm.
still a stuckness on?
I see this often in younger women whose younger women friends or partners or whatever, um, aren't going to be, they don't believe them if they say something nice. They, if, let's say, we talk about, in the eating disorder world, like fat's not a bad word. Like it's not an insult. It's a fact for some people. And if we continue to demonize the word fat, then fat people continue to be demonized. And so let's say it's a fat client and their friends are like, no, no, you're not fat. Your belly's practically flat. Like when it's not the truth, it makes it worse. So it
Mm,
just gets really messy.
okay.
Um, and so, yeah, I'm thinking about how like that form of perfectionism can be like it needs to be spoken, like you're talking about.
Right.
Like that's the shame stays stuck without speaking it, but
Right.
making sure our clients are speaking it in a place where it can actually be processed,
Mm,
or can be received with love and competence,
mm,
maybe. Because I think most of us in our America are pretty messed up about our bodies, and we can't really respond from competence in a lot of ways to other
mm.
people's stuff.
Yeah.
Um, or you think your stomach's disgusting and you're smaller than me, so what are you saying about me? That kind of thing.
Right.
um Versus a perfectionism around, um you know being an incredible singer or doing a great job academically or things like that, where the shame of falling short of your own expectations, your friends can sometimes support really well and sometimes be like, no, 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 you were great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I ultimately hear there is that how do I say this? Even within that community, that safe space, people can't be everything to us.
Yes.
Right? And so there are certain things that have to, believe, be dealt with clinically. be dealt with you and your therapist
Mhm.
before we even take it to, or or maybe, yeah, that have to be dealt with clinically before we because when I hear that example, I'm hearing friends who they're very safe spaces, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the competence piece. Like
It's
they,
like this is like I have no idea what to say.
yeah.
I'm gonna say the wrong thing. I
Mhm.
obviously am saying the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And so it's there I there's a lot of there's more work there that has to
Mhm.
be done with whether in group or with your therapist, because that is a lot of pressure to put on your friends too
Mhm.
for something like that. And it might be one of those things where as a friend you have to be able to say, I can't show up for you
Mhm.
in this area. I don't think I'm able to show up for you in the way you need me to show up for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also them like acknowledging or knowing that when they're talking about their shame, no matter what their shame is, what they're really looking for is love and acceptance.
Yes.
Like it's just like, here's some garbage in my head. Do you still love
Yeah.
me?
Yeah.
Um,
That's very true. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess the real thing there is keying in on that and knowing to ask for that.
mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Being able to set your friends up for success in those moments of, this is what's happening, this is how I feel, this is what I need you to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Which I remember learning that in my 20s in therapy, and it was so mind blowing to me that I could
Yeah.
give my friends scripts essentially. Like,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
how like when they returned in kind, like they were like, oh cool, when I say this, will you say this? Like we were really able to support each other.
Yes.
Yeah. And also maybe it's in how you phrase it, like how
Mhm.
you help your clients phrase it to their friends of like, instead of like, I hate my body, it's so disgusting, to
Yeah.
say, I'm really beating myself up a lot today about my
Yeah.
body. Can you
Yeah.
just remind me that you love me no
Absolutely.
matter what I look like?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Setting our friends up for success.
yeah, it's so powerful.
It is.
It's
It is.
and it's a kindness.
Mhm. It is. There's a lot of kindness in that.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. Let's see. What else do you think is really important for people to know when they are seeing their clients who are struggling with perfectionism? What haven't we hit yet?
Let's see. Um, we can talk a bit more about the difference between perfection and striving for excellence.
Yeah.
Right? Um, and it's really a mindset shift at the end of the day. It's a mindset
Hmm.
shift. It's first of all acknowledging that perfection is impossible and extremely subjective. Right. So
Hmm.
we got to put that into context. And then it's about, and a lot of this, I will say, it's very difficult to do unless you have checks and balances in place.
Okay.
So one of the things that we need to be able to do is set realistic goals. But if you're a perfectionist, you might greatly struggle with setting realistic goals.
Hmm.
So what are some checks and balances we can put in place to help us with that? And
Hmm.
so that might be like running my goals by someone who can really assess this for me. Okay, this is your goals, this is your timeline. This seems feasible, this doesn't seem feasible. Let's talk about what's happening, what some of that. So, and then another big thing is breaking those goals down into small, achievable, realistic steps, and then celebrating all the small things along the way
Hmm.
that happen. Um, and knowing that another big piece of it is knowing that failure is going to be a part of the process.
Hmm.
You're not going to learn anything without it.
Yeah. I always, one of the like tenets of entrepreneurism that I had to really wrap my head around was fail fast.
Mm-hmm.
That the goal is not to not fail. is
Yeah.
to fail quickly so you can move on to whatever the next step is or the
Yep.
next idea is.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
that's helped normalize for me that this is just
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's part of the process.
yeah.
And I think perfectionists don't really realize how small they're keeping themselves
Hmm.
because of that fear of failure, that fear of being seen trying and making a mistake.
Hmm.
And so we typically don't do anything until it already looks good. It's already shiny and ready to go. I'm not
Right.
going to show you it until then. But there's so many things that you're missing out on when you adopt that mindset.
Yeah. That makes me think so much about, we talk about nervous system regulation and self-care and these kinds of things often as like having something you do for fun, having a hobby, having something that's like not monetized, there's no pressure on
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and how that perfectionism and not being great at something the first couple times you try it can
Yeah.
really leave us bereft of
Yes.
anything that
Yes.
is helpful or enjoyable
Yeah.
or, low stakes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's so vital to being like a well-rounded human being who enjoys their life to have some things that aren't work related or family related or even self-growth related.
I
Just
I struggle
something
with
dumb you do for fun.
yeah, yeah. I cannot speak on that because I'm still struggling with that tremendously. But I agree 100%. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think because it's painful, right? Like we try something and
Yeah.
we are not good at it.
Yes.
And that brings up all that shame, all
Yes.
that unlovability.
Absolutely.
And we know as adults,
Yeah.
especially, like we're not going to be great at everything we do the first
Mm-mm.
time. Maybe
Mm-mm.
like even with lots of practice, we're not going to be great. But
Absolutely.
it still stirs all that up in a way that just makes us never want to do that thing again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have to, when I think about some of my clients, I have to really challenge them on, so you did this thing that you've never done before in your entire life, but you were supposed to know exactly what to do, how to do it. And I'm not talking about like writing in cursive, like this is a monumental thing that you're
Hmm.
trying for the first time. And somehow
Hmm.
miraculously, you were supposed to get behind the wheel and ace it.
Hmm. Yeah. Your teacher
Like
was
what?
supposed to look at you first lesson and be like, impressive.
Yeah,
I've never seen
exactly.
anything like it.
Like what let's collect some evidence about that. Like what why did you think that you were supposed to know how to do this already?
Hmm.
Like you were just supposed to wake up and get out of bed and go. Like we have to talk about some of those irrationalities in our thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's this fantasy world that we live in
Hmm.
that keeps us safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also often perpetuated by um, you know, I received so much praise when I, had these accolades and achievements. I just it's almost becomes an expectation that
Hmm.
as I'm doing, I'm going to keep receiving, this praise and accolades and whatnot. And so it's earth shattering. It
Hmm.
really is earth shattering when it doesn't happen.
Right. Right. I think about like all the like the graveyard of gear that I have for different things I was going to try and sucked at.
Hmm.
And so I just did it maybe one more time and didn't
Hmm.
improve. And so I just threw it in the drawer or put it in the
Yeah.
garage. And how it wasn't like somebody with ADHD who was like, that's really fun. On to the next thing.
Yeah.
It was like I have to hide this in this drawer
Yes.
because it represents
Something I
me
can't do.
sucking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Mm. So yeah, when we think about, I really cringe a little bit when I hear healthy perfectionism.
Hmm.
I really want to encourage people to adopt healthy striving.
Yes.
Because even within that terminology, healthy striving is there's this understanding that I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm going to fall short. And through each of those mistakes, there's going to be a reassessment, a realignment, something new that I can take with me,
Mhm.
an adjustment that's going to help me get to where I want to go,
Yeah.
as opposed
Mm.
to perfectionism, which is I made a mistake and now my life is over.
Right.
And this is why I won't try anything new. This is why I don't put myself out there. Let me just stick to what I know.
Hmm. Which does keep us really small.
Very small.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And keeps us like in a fixed position in our loved one's mind about who we are and what we're capable of.
Exactly. Exactly. 100%. Um, I used to be in this friendship where they only knew, and it's partly my fault because this is only ever how I presented myself to you.
Hmm.
Um, and then, when I would try new behavior, it was looked at as, you don't do that. Why are you doing
Hmm.
that?
Hmm.
That's not you. Who are you trying to be? And I'm just like, okay, never mind. Let me retreat back.
Right.
Let me get back into, my little box, you know.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it's interesting how sometimes not only ourselves but our community is responsible for perpetuating that belief system within us.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think about that old, like, we get sick in relationships, we get well in relationships, and
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how vital, especially for people who are so perception based,
Mm-hmm.
like seeing ourselves reflected back through loving
Yes,
eyes who believe sky's the limit for us,
absolutely.
and who have an appreciation and understanding that it'll be a little messy for us
Yes.
sometimes. And it helps model for us that it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah,
really is.
absolutely. Absolutely. You, part of finding your tribe is finding people who don't want to keep you small,
Hmm.
who don't want to keep you in a box, who encourage you, who are going to cheer you along the way as you're
Hmm.
trying new things and making mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how we don't have to have all the internal resources all the time when we've
Mm-mm.
got a great community.
Exactly.
We don't have to be perfectionistic about our internal resources.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about moments in session where, like we just talked about with something like hobbies, where
Mhm.
you're encouraging clients and it's something you also struggle with. How
Yes.
did your perfectionism come up? And then how do you handle that?
You want me specifically or an example?
Yeah, if you feel comfortable talking about it, I'm curious.
Oh, golly. So the tough thing about it is the main reason why I said I struggle with it is because I can't think of something that I'm doing. Well, that's not true. That's not true because I'm thinking about a hobby being something that you don't monetize,
Uh-huh.
right? And so, or yeah, that I guess it is true. I have a difficult time thinking about something that I'm doing that is not tied to a goal.
Hmm.
So right now I am trying a lot of new things out loud
Hmm.
tied to goals within my practice.
Hmm.
But within my personal life right now, yeah, there's not much there, Allison.
Hmm.
You know.
I like your little eek face. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
because I think there's opportunity as a therapist. Like, I think we get our mirrors held up to us a lot too. And what we end up
yeah,
saying to our clients that
100%.
we're like, oh, I need to write that down for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know one thing that I really want to do is I really want to take singing lessons. And
Yes.
I'm not a singer. I've always been a musician. Like I played the piano,
Hmm.
flute, band nerd, but I've always wanted to take singing. I don't know why I haven't signed up or looked for it yet. I can't tell you, but
Hmm.
it is on my list of something so I will put that out there.
Okay. So you probably know me well enough to know I'm going to be like, hey, do you want to say by when you're going to look into that and call someone or email them?
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna give myself, because I want to be very realistic with my goals.
Mhm.
I'll give myself to sometime around fourth quarter.
Okay.
Like,
Okay. So by the end of the year,
by the end of the year, I will have done my first singing lesson.
I love it. I love
Hmm.
it. Also great for the nervous system, singing.
Yes.
Mhm.
There you
It
go.
it always comes back around. Voice lessons not necessarily great for the nervous system in the same way, but helps you sound great and protect your voice. So yeah,
Awesome.
yeah, yeah. Because I ask, because we do as therapists realize more often than like a software engineer may, like, oh, look, here's a space in my life that could use some attention.
Yeah.
And so when we notice that, like we can just notice it, right? We
Mhm.
don't have to be in immediate action about it in our perfectionistic self.
Yeah.
We can just notice and maybe make a plan for later, maybe not. But
Okay.
um, I know that's always my knee jerk of like, oh, I just said something to a client that I needed to hear myself. Now, how do I integrate that as quickly and efficiently as possible in order to be doing it right?
Right, right. Not everything needs immediate reaction.
Right.
Sometimes, like you said, you can just sit with it, reflect on it, stew on it for a bit, and decide
Yeah.
what you want to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, like noticing what my immune system, that too, but what my nervous system and what my clients' nervous systems often do is there's this like like a nervous energy around
Yes.
action. And for
Yes.
me, I'm starting to see that as like, okay, that's a red flag. Like I don't need to be
Yes.
intense about it. I can think about it. I can
Yes.
sit still for a minute, think still for a minute,
Yes.
instead of knee-jerk reaction, trying to
100%. Yes. What
manage
is the
something.
knee-jerk reaction about? Like, why do you feel like you have to address it right then and there? Why does there
Right.
have to be an action plan so soon?
Right.
Because we're
Story of
human.
my life. My partner is very much like, let's take a beat. And
Yeah.
I don't have a beat wired into me, I don't think. So it's a constant, like, you don't have to send that text right now. Like, let's talk
Right.
about it a little bit.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so yeah, it's good to find people in your community who are the opposite too, to show
Mhm.
you that there's another way.
Absolutely.
Just to see what that even looks like.
Exactly. Yeah, it's refreshing though.
Hmm.
It's really refreshing when you start welcoming that space and that pause,
Hmm.
and knowing that not everything requires an immediate attention or immediate response. It allows you to breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
your
I think
body
there's
really
a,
starts leaning into the just a overall sense of ease.
mhm. Yeah. And if your clients like me aren't there where it's second nature yet,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then it's okay if it's like
It's
an
okay.
afterthought while you're in the middle of planning of like, oh, wait.
Yeah,
I can just sit and be, I don't have to even finish this sentence I'm writing. I can just
exactly.
sit for a second.
Exactly. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of power in a pause.
Yes, absolutely. Jeanette, thank you so much for talking with us about this. I feel like the conceptualizing and really understanding the heavy shame behind
Yes.
perfectionism, the desire to be loved.
Yes.
That
Yep,
those
that's
two
good.
things are really the drivers.
Mhm.
And the thing that helps so deeply is working on that attachment wound and
Yes, absolutely.
finding that community that really gives you what you've been looking for all along in like
Mhm.
unconditional acceptance.
Mhm. 100%.
Yay. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope that broadened your clinical horizons. Head over to notboringces.com to get your CE credit. Want to have a not boring conversation with me about your clinical area of expertise? You can apply there too. If you like this conversation, leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and be sure to subscribe for future conversations.